Society Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Liam Carballal, and on today's episode of History Repeats on HMTV, we will be discussing the Wannsee Conference. I'm joined today by Donna Rosenblum. Now, the Wannsee Conference was held in January 1942. It's about 10 years to the day, well, not to the day, but 10 years after the Reichstag fire, which propelled Hitler into power and started the train that would lead ultimately to the Holocaust. Why did he burn down Auschwitz? Or why did he burn down the Reichstag?
Well, Hitler came to power, obviously, January 30th. He was appointed Chancellor of Germany. His campaign and his philosophy of the Nazi Party really was this concept of fear. And having a military state of emergency. He was really looking to, take complete totalitarian control of Germany. So one of the ways you do that is you need to have a fear factor that there has to be a state of emergency, and that allows the Enabling Act and other things to come its way. So by burning down the Reichstag, he basically said that it was the communists and the
so he was killing a couple of different birds with one stone.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So he was
blaming the communists,
blaming other political opposition,
while concentrating power.
Concentrating power onto himself and basically saying, because Hitler did say, and I truly do feel he believed, that he was the savior of Germany. There was almost not that he, was religious or had anything to do with religion, but he was almost a messiah figure.
Yes.
He was the savior of Germany, and he wanted people to view him as that person. So all of these things allowed him. So, it was a very multi-pronged approach, what he was doing.
Yes.
Many different balls in the air that he was juggling to establish the control that he needed.
So the march down towards the Holocaust, is it fair to say that it starts with the Nuremberg Laws?
I think it starts earlier than that.
Yes.
Irving Roth, who was a Holocaust survivor that I was very close with, who I really mentored me, talked about the signposts on the way to Auschwitz.
Yes.
That there were many signposts. So obviously the Nazi Party coming to power.
Yes.
Okay. The boycott, the Nazi boycott, the April 1st boycott
of
Jewish shops and businesses was, again, another step.
Yes.
Okay. We want to convince the German people that the Jews are the other.
Yes.
That the Jews are the traitors, that the Jews are our misfortune, that the Jews need to be punished, that they cannot control or have money. So the boycott was a way of, again, creating that separate. Okay.
Yes.
And a lot of the times when I talk to students, I always bring up the fact and ask them, well, what percentage of the German population was actually Jewish in 1933? After I've kind of talked about propaganda, and I've showed them some Nazi propagandic images, and I've kind of led them on that path, most of the time, the kids will give me high numbers. 20%, 30%. I've even had kids who say 80% of the German population is Jewish. And it makes sense for them to think that.
Yeah.
Based on what breadcrumbs I've already left for them.
Yeah.
And then I say, well, think about, even if 25 or 40% of the German population was Jewish, and you are now boycotting those businesses and those people, what's going to happen to your country? And of course, the light bulb goes off, and they're like, oh, yeah, I guess that would be a problem. And then I say, it was less than 1%. Less than 1% of the German population was Jewish. 500,000 Jews lived in Germany. It's a very small number. Boycotting the businesses of Jews, it was, yes, it helped the German businesses, of course, but it really it was more about the other. It was more about making that distinction. It was more about the dehumanization process that began. And I think that the boycott is the beginning of that dehumanization, burning the Reichstag down, the Nazi propagandic paper Die Stürmer, all of these things of bombarding and saying the constant threat of the Jews. The Jews have to be taken care of. The Jews have to be eliminated, And so that leads that on that path. So, you have the boycott, you have the Nazi book burning.
Yes.
Right? Then you have the Enabling Act, and you have other laws that are going to be passed. The Nuremberg Laws, I think, are the first real big step after the boycott.
Yes.
Okay, of defining who's Jewish, who's not. They're race laws. They are economic laws. They are establishing the theory of eugenics.
They're banning Jews from certain professions.
Right.
I heard one profession that they were banned from was musicians. They were not allowed to be musicians because it's part of the culture, and culture dictates how a country moves forward, I suppose. To me, it's ridiculous, but...
Yes. So, you have that happening in 1935. So then you have all of those restrictions that will continue. Every month, 2 months, another law was passed saying that Jews couldn't do certain things. So then they couldn't go to the theater. They couldn't go to the public pool. They couldn't go to school. They couldn't own radio. Like all of these things, they have to start giving up property. Yeah. And it just continues. There were over 400 laws passed that restricted Jewish activity. So by the time 1938 or 1939 comes around, Jews can't do anything, and they can't even feed their families.
And they become, I have to assume, some sort of hindrance. That they're made a hindrance by the Nazis to their own.
And I think that again was another objective, because if you are dehumanizing and you are saying that a certain group of people are worthless.
Yes.
And don't deserve to live, that you want them to look and be represented in a way that allows you to do that.
Yeah.
And again, up until probably 1930, probably up until Kristallnacht, which we'll talk about,
yes.
Jews might have been able to escape if they had the financial means to do so, because it wasn't easy to leave.
Well, what year was Kristallnacht again? I'm sorry.
Kristallnacht was November 9th, 1938.
I see. Yeah.
So
we talked about avian the other day.
Yes, which was July of 1938. So, the Jews might have been able to escape. But again, you needed documentation. You needed to have money. You could not take any money out of Germany. Yep. So it was very, very difficult to be able to do that. But again, probably by 1938, time frame of Kristallnacht, about 200,000 of that 500,000 did leave Germany, but where did they go? They went to France, they went to Belgium, they went to Holland. They didn't get far enough away.
On the episode I just did this weekend, I talked about Rafael Trujillo, and they had mentioned that they had planned to take in 100,000 Jews, but by the end of it, only about 1,000.
Yeah, it was maybe 800 or something, yeah.
So to what extent was that the war or deliberate Nazi policy that forbade them from leaving?
It's a good question. I'm not really sure why more Jews were not allowed to leave to go to the Dominican Republic if the Dominican Republic said that they would take them in. It could have just been that at that point in time, by the fall of 38, Hitler is already amassing for war. So by this point, we're talking about annexation of different lands. He's on a war route. He doesn't really care. He doesn't really want them to leave. I think prior to that, in 35 and 36, Hitler would let Jews get out of my country.
Yes.
Go. It's okay. But I think the objective, now that he knows that war is going to come to be, which of course he always did want, I mean,
Yes.
that was always his objective. But now that he sees that it's really going to happen, war, when you're at war, there are different rules, right?
Yes.
It's much easier to murder and to kill people when you're at war, and that goes for every war.
Yeah.
So I think his philosophy did change. Again, a lot of historians have said that they don't even want to give Hitler the recognition that he really had a thought out plan. We want things to be all in order, right? We were having this conversation earlier about being able to rationalize and understand, and A leads to B and B leads to C. And so, I don't know if he really ever fully thought it out. I think he had a general plan. And I think he was kind of flying by the, unfortunately, he was flying by the seat of his pants, but he was doing it. His delegation and his leaders were able to implement and carry through a policy that I don't think Hitler himself really fully had figured out.
It makes me think about that. That's interesting. So Hitler, he lost eventually, but is it possible to say that he was a victim of his own success in a certain way? He, up until about 1942, he had gotten everything that he wanted, but he started making decisions that I would not call rational. He declared war on the United States for almost no reason. He invades the Soviet Union, even though he had a non-aggression pact. Is it possible to say that Hitler, or fair to say that Hitler started making rash decisions because everything else had gone his way up until that point?
Yes, of course. I do think that he truly believed he was going to win. And maybe that is really more of the issue, and his success in taking over Europe, and the fact that there was really very little resistance and he was doing what he wanted to do, led him to, believe that he was invincible. Yeah. And of course, that's, strike one. When you believe you're infallible, that's not. No one is infallible. No. So, so yes, he might have stretched himself way too thin. I think invading the Soviet Union, as we discussed earlier, led to a lot of problems for the German army. I think that was one of their big demises. Yes, and the United States being involved in the war, all of these factors coming together began to erode German victories.
One of the interesting things as I was researching Wannsee is the time it was called. It was January 1942. The Germans had just suffered a massive defeat at the Battle of Moscow, literally just 2 weeks earlier. German soldiers are freezing to death, not unlike Napoleon, which I have to assume some people saw historical parallels up to them at that point. Hitler had declared war on the United States, not the other way around. Germany declared war on the United States because Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and he wanted Japan to help him. Japan, Aryans. So I have to assume arrogance had to come into this, that they're discussing how to get rid of the Jewish population and not how do we maybe deal with this very serious situation. We are at war with two more superpowers at this point. We didn't need to start a war with either one of them. I guess arrogance is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, well, and it's not logical, but then, war is not logical either. So, yes, I think that's definitely something to consider. That, as I said, many historians have talked about that there were two wars going on during this time frame. There was the military takeover of countries, and then there was the final solution war. And that had Hitler not spent so much time and effort in enacting the final solution, he might have been able to win, and then he could have had Plan B.
He diverted
continue.
Trains that could use moved war material.
He diverted a lot of the war effort in order to murder the Jews of Europe, and but that was part of his that was part of his new order.
Would it be fair to say the Holocaust doomed Hitler then?
I don't know if I would if I would go.
That's a hell of a question.
Yeah, look, it he was successful.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, 6 million Jews lost their lives because of this final solution plan. So there was quite a bit of success. I think that the Allies battling and taking control is what was enabled the final solution to ultimately lose. I mean, again, there is a lot of debate about this, that the Allied forces, we knew about the final solution. We knew exactly what was happening at Auschwitz. We could have done much more to dismantle the gas chambers, to bomb the railroad tracks that led to Auschwitz, that we could have done much more, and we did not. Roosevelt's argument was to win the war. We win the war, we stop the final solution, we stop. So, again, I'm not a historian of military history.
Yeah.
So, so I think that there are arguments for many cases. But, ultimately, Hitler was spread too thin. There's no question.
One of the other things I read about the Wannsee concert is it was absurdly brief.
Yes,
90 minutes.
90 minutes. Right.
There are people who are on death row whose jury deliberation lasted longer than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just for one person.
Yeah. 90-minute lunch where they were going to decide how to kill all the Jews of Europe, over lunch. And Hitler wasn't there.
No.
I mean, that's the other point. Hitler was not at the Wannsee Conference. No. So that's why I'm saying I don't really think that he really had a clear plan. He had goals and objectives, and unfortunately for the Jewish people, these people who he delegated to were efficient. Yeah. And again, at the Wannsee Conference, there were a lot of the Nazi doctors who were involved in the euthanasia T4 movement that was done within Germany to get rid of all of the mentally and physically disabled and anybody who was deemed as unfit, blind, any of that. Those doctors were part of the Wannsee movement. They were the ones that were used in the death camps because they had experience with murdering people.
Yikes.
So, and again, that in and of itself, you're talking about doctors who are supposed to have an oath to preserve human life.
Yeah.
And here they are killing
children,
people, murdering people because they have deemed them as being unfit, unwanted, that they are a toxic vermin, contaminant, and that they need to be removed from society. I give the analogy with kids all the time. It's very simplistic, but I think it's very effective, where I talk about Nazi ideology and Nazi race theory as having a bowl of fruit. And if you have a bowl of fruit in front of you with apples, pears, and bananas, and one apple is rotten, and I say to the kids, well, what's going to happen to the rest of the fruit in the basket? And the kids say, oh, the fruit's going to rot. And I say, well, how do we save the fruit? Well, you get rid of the rotten apple. Right. And that, to me, is the concept of where Jews were. They were the rotten fruit that was going to contaminate the rest of the fruit. So we must save the greater good, by getting rid of. There's no, oh, well, we'll, try to save a piece of the fruit. We're going to get rid of it. That's it. And that's what they did.
One of the things I also researched or found when I was researching this is just how much effort they put into almost disguising what they were doing. The only reason we know about this is everyone was supposed to burn the minutes or evidence that this meeting had been held. They found, I think, one copy of the minutes left in a vault in one of the men who attended's office. There was just one copy that the reason we know about that this happened. They also used a lot of euphemisms,
Yes.
like send east or evacuated in lieu of just saying murder.
Relocation, right?
Yeah.
Final solution. Yeah.
Is this just propaganda for the wider world or for just themselves, just to denial? Or I don't know if they were in denial about what they were doing.
It's a great question. And again, I'm sure there are historians who have written about this. I think, again, it was written this way because things that were being sent by telegraph or by a letter or whatever, I do think to a certain degree that Hitler did not want the wider world to know what was going on.
Yeah.
And I do think that these terms were used. They also, I think, wanted to make sure that the local populations and other people did not. So when you heard relocation for work, you know, you read this all the time, that Jews wanted to cling to the hope. You know, they're not going to get rid of all of us. Those rumors about these death camps, the rumors about the trains. I mean, you had people coming back to the ghettos who had survived and telling Jews what was going to happen, and yet nobody wanted to believe it. I mean, Irving Roth, in his own self-published story, talks specifically about how he's from Czechoslovakia, his family leaves, they smuggle themselves across the border to Hungary, they're in Hungary, he's living in the countryside, and Hungary was safe for up until 1944, but the anti-Jewish legislation begins. And in the spring of 1944, when things start to go south, you know, Irving makes that statement to the elders. I mean, again, he's a 14-year-old boy. And he says, no, we can't. He doesn't want, when they talk about everybody reporting for relocation, he tells his grandparents, we're not going. You know what's going to happen. They're lying. And nobody would believe him. And Irving and one of his cousins actually run away. And they run into the forest. And they are surrounded. They are found by German soldiers with dogs. They were not shot, thank goodness. Yeah. And he was brought back to the town and then was put on the cattle car with his grandparents and his brother and other family members. So because people want to believe. You always want to hold that hope. And you hear that all the time in all the ghettos. And yes, and then you also have resistance. And you have people who say, we're going to go out fighting. We're going to do all of these different things. So you have both sides of the spectrum. But I think it's a natural human tendency to want to believe that things are going to be okay.
I can see that nowadays.
Of course, you see it, right? You see it. Yes, you see it all the time. It's normal. Yeah, it's hard. That's why this is such a complicated subject and a complicated issue, because it's not rational.
One of the leaders of the Wannsee Conference was Adolf Eichmann. He had an interesting life. He had escaped and managed to flee to Argentina for 20 years. He was captured by Mossad and brought back to Israel. And he was interviewed by Hannah Arendt, and she was just taken away. He was not a malicious sociopath. He was just, the words she used, sleepwalker in life and a stereotypical bureaucrat, and represented the banality of evil. What do you think drove the Holocaust more? Just people not caring, or just outright maliciousness on part of a few figures like Hitler?
I mean, I think when you talk about someone like Eichmann, again, very complicated individual, pure evil, but I think under it all, he believed that he was doing what needed to be done. And I think that's what he told himself every single day so that he could carry out what he was doing. I think that he really, truly believed that. And he didn't believe that he was evil, because he couldn't. He was doing what needed to be done. He even gave that speech to many members of the Einsatz group in doing the shooting that, as difficult as this is what needs to be done for Germany. So, all of these people, I think, really did have delusions. major delusions. But overall, they were evil.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of History Repeats on HMTV. I appreciate you coming, Donna.
No problem.
You for sharing your insights. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and stay connected for more engaging conversations. Until next time, take care and be well.